Have you ever wondered about all this ice bath hype that you're hearing about? All these different people sitting in their tubs, going into nature, doing fucking horse stances out there, like, whoo, ha. You see Wim Hof, you see all kinds of people doing ice baths. And have you wondered what actually happens during that ice bath to your body, to your mental being, to you? What actually happens? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this video. And let's jump right into it. First of all, I want to define what we're actually talking about. So when I'm saying ice baths in this video, I'm going to be talking about cold water immersion, meaning water between 0 and 16 degrees Celsius. So 0 would be freezing and 16 would be pretty cold, but not so horrible, not like an ice bath. But these are the temperatures that we can talk about. And of course, there will be differences between people. Some people are very cold adapted, some people are not very cold adapted. And all this is going to influence what actually happens to you during an ice bath, depending on all these different factors. But let's start with the basics. Your skin and body temperature changes. Makes sense. You go into a cold environment, you get colder. So essentially that's what happens. It depends, of course, on the temperature of the water, how cold adapted you are, and a bunch of other different factors. It also depends on what your body is like as a person. For example, someone who is short and has a lot of body fat is going to feel less cold than someone who is very tall and very skinny, simply because the short person is going to have more insulation in their body and there's going to be less surface area relative to that insulation compared to someone who's very tall and very skinny. There's not going to be a lot of insulation and there's going to be a lot of skin and a lot of surface area where you can lose body heat. And there are also other factors such as your age. So the older you are, the weaker your bodily defenses tend to be, which means that you might actually not feel as cold. So it's not going to feel as cold even though you are as cold. And there are some different risk factors in there. So one of the key things that happen when you go into an ice bath is that your sympathetic nervous system responds. It's a fight or flight mode response. And this is what happens when the body is in a perceived dangerous situation, right? So imagine you're in nature and you fall into some icy water. Pretty dangerous situation. Your body is going to respond, right? And especially if you're untrained, one of the first things that's going to happen is that you're going to start hyperventilating. Your body wants to take up more oxygen to have more energy to fight off this perceived danger, right? Makes sense. Your heart rate increases. And then another thing that happens fairly quickly is vasoconstrictions. Simply the blood vessels and different veins that you have in your body are going to start constricting. They're going to become smaller, right? So what happens then is that the blood wants to stay in your core, in all your vital organs will stay protected and keep the body heat. So that's why you get very cold hands probably and very cold feet because our hands, even though we like them, they're not vital to our survival like our lungs or our heart are. Right? So that's why that happens, and that's called vasoconstriction. We keep the blood in the vital parts. So the next thing that's going to happen is called thermogenesis, and there's a few different kinds of thermogenesis that we're going to talk about. Thermogenesis essentially means when the body is generating heat, and one of the ways the body is doing that is by shivering. So once our body temperature reaches 34, 35 degrees Celsius, of course, then we start to shiver. And that's one of the ways that our body is generating heat. It increases our metabolic rate and, making this, you're moving, so it's generating heat. And then the other way is what's called metabolic thermogenesis, which is essentially, it's also known as non-shivering thermogenesis, and it happens from brown fat activation. So brown fat is a special kind of fat and that's very rich in mitochondria, and it has a special protein called the uncoupling protein 1, and that makes it gives it the ability to generate heat very fast. So that's one of the things that happen when you do cold exposure regularly. You're going to convert white normal fat into brown fat that can help you heat up and stay warm. So those are some of the body's defense mechanisms that it uses in order to keep us warm and to tell us, okay, something serious is happening here. You need to get out of this situation. You're in the fight or flight mode. But what we can actually train ourselves to do is shift away from that sympathetic response into the parasympathetic response, also known as rest and digest. And you can essentially calm yourself down while you're sitting in the ice. So, you go in, you focus, you go into a meditative state, and maybe you do long exhalations. You can relax into the discomfort. You can learn to become comfortable in the uncomfortable, and you can actually lower your heart rate. You can do these long exhalations. You can go back into vasodilation. You can pump blood all around your body once you train for a bit. And one of the goals of your practice can be that you get into this relaxing mode, even though you're in a very uncomfortable situation. So that's also totally possible. I have recorded myself many times with a fitness tracker, and I can consistently go below a 50 beats per minute heart rate when I'm sitting there and it's a great experience. So it's totally possible to actually shift into that parasympathetic response. Of course, another thing that happens is the release of certain happiness hormones, such as norepinephrine, also known as noradrenaline, and dopamine. And those hormones are very often targeted in antidepressants, but through an ice bath, you actually release these naturally. So norepinephrine, for example, spikes. It was shown in one study where participants were sitting in 14-degree water for an hour, and their norepinephrine increased by 530% for several hours afterwards. And the same was the case with dopamine, which increased about 250%. So you can imagine it's almost like a reset to your system. Your system is flooded with these chemicals, and that's why people feel such a high after they go into ice. And it lasts for several hours, and you don't have the same side effects as you would have from an antidepressant, for example. So there's also a few other things that can occur that are maybe not so scientific, but it can almost seem like time is slowing down, because you can become very present, very in the moment, very much in your body. And I've had it several times when I was coaching someone through an ice bath who had never done it before, and they're sitting there in the ice in the beginning, they're screaming, they want to get out, but slowly but surely they start to calm down, and then all of a sudden I'm like, it's been 2 minutes now, and they're like, huh, really? They thought it was just like 15-30 seconds. It was like time went faster, or they slowed down rather than time seemed to slow down. You become very present, and that's an amazing benefit, I think. And it's almost like this, it's also a state of deep focus kind of, and you really increase your alertness, and that's also very much related to some of those chemicals, hormones that are released that I was talking about before. And the last thing that can happen is that people can experience an emotional release, either from going into the water or afterwards, simply because it can be a very strong experience. Your body might perceive that, it does perceive that it's under attack or something really dangerous is happening. And sometimes that can cause something inside you to come up. And that's a very beautiful thing, because it means that then you have the opportunity to let go of that thing. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, stick around and have a beautiful day.